betrayals, lies, abuse of power, colleagues splitting up. This whole episode is going to be on what's happened between Phil and Holly on Good Morning. No, of course it's not. It's about by-elections. Welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. Welcome back to the Lib Dem Podcast. My name is John Potter and I host this lovely little delve into liberalism. With me today, we have the fantastic former leader of Liverpool Lib Dems. We have Richard Kent. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you. I'm going to be very non-political in my new role, of course.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's why you're on the podcast, to be non-political. Yeah. And join us again. It's been a while, but the brilliant David McKenzie. Hello, David.
Hi, John. Thank you. It's good to be back. It has been months, I think. Yeah.
We're very excited, but I have to put a disclaimer now at the top of this episode because this is the first time since I have taken up a new job with the ALDC, and I just want to let everyone know that the podcast is completely independent. I do not speak for the ALDC, and there will absolutely be no form of advertising about the ALDC's wonderful products, advice, leaflet templates, or anything like that, and how much of a great deal it is for all Lib Dem campaigners and councillors out there, and what an essential thing it could be. So there'll be none of that on this podcast at all. It will be completely down the line. Isn't that right, Richard?
Oh, I'm absolutely, and I'm going to indulge in no political rhetoric because it's beneath my status as Deputy Lord Mayor of Liverpool. And I've just seen a pig fly past the window.
Absolutely. Right. Let's get on with it. David, I'm going to ask you the question. What the heck has gone on?
Oh, well, I mean, I saw the announcement, obviously, when Nadine Dorries decided to step down, and immediately I thought that was more of a, well, you're not going to let me have my peerage because you fear a by-election. Well, I'm just going to make you fight a by-election anyway as a slight. However, in the following hours and then now following day, and I think there may be more to come of this, it does seem like this is a coordinated effort to undermine the Prime Minister. It does seem like the Conservatives are swinging back towards civil war. In many ways, it seems like Boris Johnson, as is typical of that man, is out to look after his own interests, is not really interested in the findings of the committee, and wants to obviously do a very Trumpian act of saying that it's all just a conspiracy against me. There's nothing to see here. My actions should not be in any way under scrutiny. I really think that this is now the signs of a government that can no longer function, and there really is no way that this party can continue post this forthcoming election.
I mean, Richard, what for all our viewers and listeners, we're recording this on Sunday morning, but there were two events that kind of triggered this. First, it was the honours list that had came out, which obviously triggered Nadine Dorries. But then secondly, it was about the Privileges Committee report, findings which are due to be, at the time of speaking, I think they're going to be out tomorrow on Monday. So most people listening to this, they'll probably have already come out. And this is all kind of culminated in an absolute horror show for Rishi, really.
Yeah, isn't that terrible? I feel terribly upset for him and the Tory party. I can't tell you how I'm grieving at the moment. Both things are absolutely unacceptable. Clearly, I support the idea of political honours, although I haven't got one, funnily enough. My wife got a political honour. I got an honour for community service, but I have no objection to that. But using it in the form of patronage, in the way that the Tory and to some extent the Labour Party have done in the past, I find absolutely unacceptable. And particularly when you're rewarding people for failure, as Johnson has done. And certainly if Truss gets an honours list, a resignation honours list, there can be nothing but failure for every person who's got it. So there was that. And this sense of entitlement that people like Dorries had, I'm entitled to a peerage, I am who I am. But I think the final straw for Johnson wasn't that, because he doesn't care too much about other people anyway, in my view. The final straw was that he was about to be humiliated. There is no doubt that he has seen the very bad news in the disciplinary report, although we haven't seen it yet, as you rightly said. He was going to be humiliated in Parliament. That would have triggered, without a doubt, a by-election, the recall signatures, and then a by-election, with every chance of him having to lose that. And that type of person doesn't cope with failure. They breeze through life on the background of their parents, their money, their breeding, their education, and they expect to win every time. And he was not going to be humiliated at least 3 times. And he went ahead. The idea that he comes back, incidentally, I find unbelievable.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things we need to sort out here, because there's been a lot of chat about, the witch hunt and kind of the kangaroo court statements, as David alluded to. Let's not forget, these are Tory majority. The Privilege Committee has a Tory majority on it. It was voted for by Tory MPs to actually happen. And then there's also talk about Ramona plots, when actually, the people that are the Tories that are on there are actually Brexiteer Tories. And even if the Privilege Committee had found against Johnson, Parliament would have to make that vote as well, of which there's a Tory majority. So it's basically just, you could swear, David, but it's just nonsense, really, isn't it?
Well, again, I can't help but alluding to the fact that this is very similar to what happened in America, where, although not in terms of a Republican majority, when you did have the committee looking into Trump and obviously the January 4th, there was a number of Republicans, both senators and Congress people, who sat on that committee that are now persona non grata within their own party. And I believe one has actually had to leave the Republican Party, and the other one has announced that he will not be seeking re-election. That, in fact, in one case, one of those individuals was a Trump supporter originally, and then said, on the basis of what happened, I cannot support this going forward. And I think that's what we're seeing here. It is, I will leave anyone in my wake that is against me or finds against my actions, and I do not care, because ultimately, as Richard alluded to, you have a gentleman here who is just used to getting his own way and not really having to deal with the consequences of his actions. What really I find quite striking, though, is a lot of people have ruled out the potential of, my original thoughts were Boris was potentially going to seat Henley, since the MP who took over from him had stepped down. There's now a lot of chatter about, is he potentially going to go for Nadine's seat or Nigel Adams' seat? People say unlikely, but Jacob Rees-Mogg has come out this morning and basically said anyone should think again if they try to block Boris standing in a seat. So who knows what could happen?
But it's Sunak's choice. Sunak's not going to allow it to happen. Sunak will just block anything. I mean, and this is the argument that some of the Borisites are saying is, this is some grand plan. Basically, Boris has no way back into Parliament until after, not this general election that's coming, but the general election after. And one of the things that makes me think that Boris is done is the fact that I just don't think, because under the assumption that that'll be 6 years' time, Boris will have moved on by that point, would be my opinion, Richard.
Yes, first of all, make it clear that David was wrong. I've never suggested that Boris Johnson was a gentleman. The word I would use for Boris Johnson is, you know what I mean. So, yes, I think you're right. There's no way he's going to be allowed to stand in the next general election. Even if he did, he's going to come back into an opposition party. I think that is reasonably clear now. And my guess would be that if he came back after the following general election, he'd be coming back to an opposition party. He will be at the age to say, do I want to do the slog, which William Hague did or Ian Duncan Smith did, and lead the party to yet another defeat, which, given the scale of the potential anti-conservative number of MPs, and I use those words very carefully, I don't think he'll want to come back at all. Why would you, if you can make 5 million not being the Prime Minister?
I'm just trying to find the actual statistics, if you could bear with me 1 second, about where Johnson's poll rating is in terms of his personal likability. And there's only 2 world leaders that are less than Boris Johnson. That's Xi Jinping.
Let us guess.
Putin.
North Korea.
There you go. So here we go. You got, no. Xi Jinping even beats Boris Johnson in the British election. The only people that are worse on this polling is Vladimir Putin and Prince Andrew. everyone, Philip Schofield, who I mocked before.
Wait, is Kim Jong-un above him?
He's not on this, so I've got King Charles at the top here at plus 19. Holly Willoughby, I can't say her name.
Willoughby.
Holly Willoughby at minus 12. Keir Starmer minus 14. Rishi Sunak minus 26. Philip Schofield minus 39. Xi Jinping minus 40. And then good old Boris at minus 45. He's not coming back.
I thought you said they were world leaders.
Yeah, okay. I meant just known people at the moment. Yeah, I do realise that Phil and Holly are not world leaders. I want to put that out there. But it's about.
But they used to be in your eyes, John. In that
now they're dead to me completely. But it actually
says a lot about it, doesn't it, David? To be honest.
But what's interesting with this is I don't see place for Boris to come back. I think he would actually quite like opposition, Richard, because I think he's shit at governing. I think opposition and speaking is what he probably wants more out of it. But I just don't see a track back for him. The only way I can see it is if Sunak gets absolutely annihilated at the general election next year. But he won't be an MP at that point, so he's still going to have to wait. And it goes back to what David said about maybe we need to change some of our rules, actually, because both Trump and Johnson were not like any other leaders we've had in Britain and the US in terms of the good chat rules, all these kind of things where we didn't need to make laws about this thing because how could they possibly happen? And that's happening in America right now where they're saying, well, what if Trump wants to run for president from jail? Technically, there's no law stopping him from doing that because no one ever thought that it would ever be something that would actually happen. But that's Boris and Trump all over. But let's get on to the actual by-elections. So we have got 3 by-elections. I realise there is one up in Scotland as well for Ferrara, who is
Rutherglen and
West England.
Yeah, that's right. But that'll be a recall petition. So I'm leaving that slightly separate to this. Me and David are organising a Scottish politics podcast coming up soon. So okay, let's talk about the 3 that we know about so far at time of going to recording. By the time we've done this, it's probably we're going to have another one. I do like, if any of you listeners and viewers out there ever want to have a laugh, just look at Have I Got News For You's Facebook and Twitter feed, where because they record on a Thursday night, pretty much all these major events keep on happening on a Friday. So they just put like a tweet saying, oh, bollocks from the editor's team. But we've got mid Bedfordshire, which is Nadine Dorris's seat, which is, for those of you who don't know where mid Bedfordshire is, it's near Milton Keynes. If you think of Oxford, Cambridge and Northampton and St Albans below, kind of all circling around it, is probably the easiest place to do it. Uxbridge and South Runscliffe. Oh, God.
Ruislip.
Thank you. I'm just going to say Uxbridge. I'm going to do that again.
How does a foreigner understand how to say it properly and you don't, Potter?
Because he's posh and I'm not. So the Uxbridge seat, which is actually West London, and actually, again, it's one of these seats where you think, I'm surprised Labour do as well at, but we will talk about that. And then you've got Selby, which is actually about to change again. And one thing to consider when we talk about these by-elections, it's not just about the current boundaries. All the political parties are thinking, okay, what does this mean for the new boundaries that are about to happen? And Selby is where my mum and my sister live in Yorkshire. They defected over to the Yorkshire side, and it's a beautiful part of North Yorkshire. So basically 2 southern, or you can say 1 London, 1 southern, 1 northern is kind of how we go. So, Richard, I suppose your view is that it appears like the Labour and the Lib Dems, there's no formal pact, there will never be a formal pact, but have certainly put their cards down. Okay, I think this is where we're going to put most of our efforts.
That makes sense. The trouble is I can't work out which to do. While there were 2, it was absolutely clear. We should concentrate on mid-beds and they should concentrate on Johnson's seat. They're huffing and puffing at the moment, saying they're going to go for both. But whether any of us have got the resources to do that is another matter. I haven't got my head around the Selby situation, though, which you say is much more like, for example, Tiverton and Honiton, We're not as strong in Selby area as we were there, although we were still third. And it will have the advantage, to my mind, of not being the Labour key seat, although I'll fight it hard. And it won't attract the media attention, which would boost Labour, because journalists are lazy buggers by and large. And if they can do 2 by-elections, and get back in time for afternoon tea, they will do that. So I think we need to think very carefully about Selby. And also, as a northerner, we've discussed this on many occasions, we've got to build up in the north of England as well as Scotland, Wales. We can't just be a London and South East party. So I think we've got to put a lot into Selby. And unless I'm told otherwise by the party, that's where I will be going.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very, for those that don't know, the constituencies are kind of an odd-shaped one, but it's just south of Harrogate and Knaresborough and just to the west of York, 2 areas where the Lib Dems have fairly. I mean, for me, it feels like North Shropshire. It feels like that sort of northern rural belt, where fairly well-off people live and think, and it feels very well. I mean, basically, if these were all 3 of these seats, David, I quite like the look of, but obviously the Lib Dems have got to, we talk about not overstretching ourselves on a general election. It's the same with these by-elections.
Yeah. I think, one of the things that people keep on coming to me is that Ed Davey had said they'd be, well, now they've announced the third. He'd originally said we'll be standing candidates in both seats when it was simply mid-beds and Uxbridge. I think we will obviously stand candidates in all 3 seats, but we will obviously make a calculated decision about where the majority of resources gets placed and where we spend money. As Richard said, we'll have limited resources, limited finances with a general election coming up as well. So you need to prioritise how you're going to spend that money for the biggest return. And I think, looking at the demographics in the areas of these seats, I originally thought mid-beds, but now, similarly Selby, I'm sort of thinking actually that may be a better option. I was actually up in Harrogate not too long ago for a business meeting, but I drove through some of the Selby constituency, and this is not me in retrospect saying at the time I thought these are the kind of places that we should be doing better in. And it does seem like the sort of area where, let's be frank here, Labour will probably do very well in Uxbridge, and there's a real chance with only a slightly over 7,000 majority that they can turn that around, as long as they don't pick the candidate they picked last time, because that was a disaster. We'll go into that in more detail if you want. But then if you look at for us, I think if Selby, the only people I think that have a chance of taking that large majority off the Conservatives is us. It's not going to go to Labour, and it's very much similar to, as we said there, North Shropshire or Tiverton and Honington, where we can have an opportunity to convince those voters that put us in place. You may have some concerns about where the Labour Party is going. You don't have to have those same concerns with us.
And I'm going to read a tweet from Tim Farron because he puts it better than I did. There are seats where the Lib Dem floor is lower than Labour's, as in so our vote can drop lower than Labour's natural supporter base, but the Lib Dem ceiling is higher than Labour's. So Labour will not win that Selby seat. They will not win mid-beds, but the Lib Dems could. And I think that, and we should also just preference as well, that we've got you with Tiverton and Honiton, Amersham and Cheshire and Amersham, and North Shropshire were all historically amazing by-election victories that, other than maybe Cheshire and Amersham, that was the only one where people thought, oh, Lib Dems might do. The others were like, 200-year, 100-year-old seats, that any one of these is going to be a tough fight. And for people who maybe aren't in the weeds of campaigning, don't realise just how much effort, money, time, and everything goes into winning these seats. It's going to be a really tough fight to win any of them, isn't it, Richard?
Absolutely. And there is precedent around there. It goes back a long time, but we took the Ripon by-election, which was partly Leeds, partly Bradford, but a huge chunk going up around Pateley Bridge, curving around Harrogate. And we wiped the floor in those areas. And as David said, there are people there who find the Tory party distasteful, but still find the Labour Party even more distasteful. The only way large numbers of votes are going to go in Selby are to us. We are the only people that can take that from Tories. Now, I know that because I know the area reasonably. That could be true of Mid-Bedfords. I'm not as knowledgeable of that area, but the question for our High Hidgens is how well can we function in two places? But fortunately, they are, I would guess, 200 miles apart. And it'll be a lot easier for Lib Dems to go from Stockport, to go from York, to go from Harrogate, to go from Liverpool. I can be in the Selby area in an hour and a quarter, hour and a half, depending on the traffic. Preston, you're probably an hour away. There are lots of us in Yorkshire and Humberside in the northwest who could very easily do their unbacking in a day and provide a lot more support in Selby.
And we could ferry in people from Scotland as well, Richard. York Railway Station, direct line,
Absolutely.
Get in there and then get some buses on the go.
I'm feeling quite excited about Selby, actually. What we could, I said we are not part of the HQ's operation, so they'll be doing it, and it'll also depend on how the local party does as well. So if you think of North Shropshire, that local party said straight away, right, we're on this. We're gonna make this work. We're gonna, regardless of what happens, we're getting 19,000 leaflets out this next week or whatever, and it all depends on whether. I mean, the Mid-Beds one has got so many strong Lib Dem areas around it, Oxfordshire, Cambridgeshire, St Albans, all that, and the London, there's London links directly to there. So if in some ways, I would imagine the Mid-Beds, and we've seen it already, 3,000 plus doors knocked on within the first day by Lib Dem campaigners going in there. They're already ramping up and getting where it needs to be. What we have to decide in the north is whether the Selby Lib Dems or the York Lib Dems or whoever's going to boss that campaign is saying, right, we're up for this as well. But it would seem a shame. Go on.
There is an obvious boss for this campaign. Our secret weapon, not you, no. Our secret weapon is Dave McCobb, who, of course, is a Hull councillor, and he's probably half an hour's drive away from parts of Selby. He knows that area very well indeed. And if his gut instinct is the same as ours, the call will go out over to Selby, boys and girls. Let's get cracking there, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I think we're all agreed. I think Mid-Beds is definitely going to get a full-on thing. I think the Uxbridge one is probably going to is the lesser of the three. But but there are no-go areas for Lib Dems. But let's talk about the consequences. So let's make what is the biggest consequence of these by-elections? And we're going to assume, and this is a big assumption and we shouldn't do it, but a big assumption that the Tories will lose all three. Okay, so let's just assume. My
one caveat to that, John, was it depends on how they space these out. In terms of how do they schedule the by-elections, because in terms of they could theoretically go for a scenario where they say lose two, keep one, and schedule the two we're most likely to lose, and then pile all our resources into keeping that third and put that at the end. I suppose it really depends on what they want this timeline to be. Do they want it done quickly, or do they want to draw it out?
I assume Sunak will get those writs done pretty quickly, because one of the biggest consequences for me, outside of just losing the seats, because some of the, like say the Selby one, for example, is going to drastically change the next boundaries anyway. But as the big thing for Sunak is what Sunak's not got a lot of time. And I think his main, we all talk about money and manpower and everything else in campaigns. For Sunak needs time. He needs time to be able to get the economy going again. He needs time to put forward policies that people might like. And if he's got 18 months left, and then 2 of them are going to be used up with this new drama with the thing, I think Sunak will not want these by-elections dragging on longer than at all possible.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. He will try and get these done by the end of July. I can't remember precisely what the timetable is. Yeah. Let everyone bugger off to on their holidays, come back effectively at the beginning of October for what is likely, well, almost certainly must be the last big session of Parliament.
Yeah.
A new Queen's speech and a move forward. I cannot see it being them wanting to drag it out, get the bad news over. blame it all on Boris Johnson and Nadine Dorries, and then go into the Conservative Party conference saying this is make or break, back me or sack me. Yeah. Whether he'll say sack me is another matter, but that will be the underlying force of his speech.
And I suppose, David, I'll let you comment about the consequences of this, because so for you, what do you think the biggest consequences are of these, under the assumption that the Tories lose them?
Well, look, I mean, there's kind of if I were Rishi Sunak, right, I'd be kind of looking at this as there's two likely scenarios here. Either he's actually, won a prize here in that he's getting his most likely saboteurs out of Parliament and out of their party, the parliamentary party. But there is a real chance that this is a horrific by-election result across all three seats for him. Let's be clear as well, it would be good for our party to get a win here. It's been a little bit of time since we had those bumps from what we got from the three by-elections, and certainly that will help our trajectory and and basically our campaigning method coming into a general election. But it's a way up here. He gets the people who are talking behind his back and trying to sabotage him at all ends out. But then he could have a very, very horrible result on his hands that again puts him on the back foot.
Well, we know they're going to be horrible results. What we don't know is whether anyone else will win them. These will be dreadful results for the Tories.
There's no win here for Rishi at all. There's no win either. The majority. I mean, if they hold on to some of these seats, you can say, we were looking like we were going to lose them and we held them. Maybe a miniature kind of victory there for him, but it is very tiny. I think the biggest effect on the Tories is the fact the attention it gets. So we saw, actually, one of the things when this kind of broke on Thursday, when it was started, one of the big stories that was starting was actually a disagreement about Labour's energy policy. But that narrative has completely been wiped out by this Tory psychodrama and infighting. And that's the thing, again, Rishi can't afford to do the time aspect, but also the attention being taken away from where he wants it to be. This is the worst possible thing that could happen to him.
And as I say, we're all crying, aren't we?
Okay. But how important is this for Labour? Let's talk about, we're going to talk about, David, we will talk about the Lib Dems, because obviously, and how important by-elections are for us as a party. But how important are these to Labour? Is it they ride high on the polls, and people like me usually pour a little bit of cold water on it, saying, look, those polls are generally down to don't knows rather than everyone being in love with Keir Starmer. So where Labour, David? I don't know if you talk to your dad or anyone else about how he's feeling at the moment.
Obviously, look, my dad and I talk regularly. That's probably not a surprise to anyone. Look, this is from Keir Starmer's perspective. This is a massive win for them. Ultimately, there was starting to be a lot of scrutiny as things got a little bit of quiet into Labour's policies coming into the next general election. A lot of questions were being asked recently about Labour's education policy, and what they were saying about basically we'll be able to do all these things if we just take away the tax breaks for private education. And people are saying, well, those numbers don't stack up. Ultimately, they are in a position now where nobody's going to be scrutinising their policies because all the media focus will be on Tory infighting. So that helps them. I think secondly, where it does help the Labour Party as well, is nobody votes for a party at war with itself. And Labour knows that better than anyone, because they've just gone through that process of where they had a disastrous result because there was in the midst of a civil war. That's now what we're maybe starting to see. It depends on whether that can be stamped out happening within the Conservatives, but there's certainly a war here between factions within this party. And as long as Labour can keep pointing to how can you vote for this party who mismanaged the economy, they are arguing amongst themselves, they don't know how to govern, we need a change in government. I think that message just breaks away from any other questions around the party itself and what their policies are. So, I think this is great for Labour ultimately.
Richard?
First of all, it's more important for Labour Party to do well for them than the result on either of the other parties. If they don't do well, then the rhetoric about them becoming the next government will certainly be minimised. we will do well, whether we'll do enough to well in the 1 or 2 seats we fight, but we will have a swing to us of considerable size. But that's not the same as someone wandering down to the House of Commons to be met and waved at. But it will be good. But I don't think that I can emphasize how strong and confident this party of ours feels at the moment. I'm working now in 5 councils where the Lib Dems advanced considerably. In 3 of them, we've taken control of the council. We're doing things differently. We're on the top of our game as a party, and anything that we gain will be a bonus. And I just cannot see there's good news for the Tories here at all. The only other party that can do well would either be the Reform Party taking advantage of this, particularly if Johnson joined them, and it won't do well otherwise, or people like Nadine Dorries now beginning to back them. But I think most people know they're a bunch of nutters and fruitcakes. But it is what I can't get out of my mind, and David partly alluded to this before, is the orchestration just to be anti-Rishi Sunak, or is it to be pro something else? And I suspect by the end of this week, or perhaps by the time most people have listened or watched this, we might know. But I just have lurking in the back of my mind that Johnson's always looking at the next deal ahead and might be trying to do something on the lines of backing another party or creating another party.
The one very quick thing I would say, Richard, is if he does join, as my neighbouring constituency in North West Leicestershire's MP has recently done. Oh no, sorry, that's not Reform. That's
whatever it is,
Reclaim or something.
The Lawrence Fox one. They might do well to try and understand what their constituency boundaries are, because I got a leaflet through my door promoting what he'd done in North West Leicestershire, and I live in South Derbyshire. So, and he's been the MP for over 10 years. You know.
But I suppose one of the things Richard really does make a point. One of the key things about by-elections and why they're useful more than just the result themselves is the transformative effect it can have on a local area in terms of, I think before we actually had a victory, I think, in Cheshire and Amersham. I think we gathered obviously thousands upon thousands of data points on voters, loads of poster sites, loads of new members, loads of new volunteers, and that can revolutionise that local party and really set them up for years, maybe decades to come, to be a much stronger force. Also, by-elections are brilliant for enthusiasm we have elections every year here in Preston, and so we've just gone through the whole slog. We had a little bit of a mini break after the election, and the people who have just got it right, when we're going down to mid-beds, when are we going to start working these by-elections? Because it is a really rejuvenating thing, actually, being part of particularly because it's like, you've got nothing to lose. Let's just go there and give it a fight. And that's really useful for your campaigners. And, and when you think of what we want to kind of get to now, because we are in the end game really towards the next general election. We are, like Richard said, we're going to be in like the last kind of session of Parliament. Having some by-elections to get yourself stuck in, battle test new staff, get people energised and thinking about a fight to come. These are all positives, even if you don't win.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. The party is doing very well at the moment. We're short of members, we're short of money. That must be our key objectives. But the way to do it is to win and win and win, and particularly consolidate in the areas that you're already doing well in.
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's much else we can say about this, apart from to everyone watching and listening. If you're fairly new to the party or anything like that, there are lots of ways you can contribute, even if you can't get to those various by-elections. Firstly,
there is just one thing I think it would be worth reflecting on before you do your appeal to go out and get stuck in.
Give money.
And that is, we've alluded to it, is this reflection on what it means for UK and US politics. Because to my mind, democracy was hugely strengthened at the end of last week, because we had institutions in both countries that could beat the bombastic politics of Trump and Johnson. In our case, it was a standards committee which would report and which the House would have supported. Whatever the result is, the House would have supported. They were bullied, they were reviled, but they held firm. In America, it was the FBI and the Department of Justice who said, no, this is the law. We will carry it out. So my fear has always been, particularly in America, that the institutions had been so weakened that the right wing, or extreme left wing for that matter, could take advantage of them. In this case, our organisations, our institutions have stood firm, and democracy is the better for what happened to Trump and Johnson last week.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we take our democracy for granted sometimes, and I'm reading a book about how the Russian how it fell from basically communism, a brief flirtation with democracy, and then suddenly a gangster capitalism. And that view is that we can never really rest on our laurels about how precious some of these institutions are. And, and people like Johnson and Trump will test them, will breach them. But actually, on both occasions, I think both countries are going to come out the right side of it, and almost a little bit stronger in terms of, how do we reform rules in Parliament that will affect, so a rogue Prime Minister can't just do what they want to do. And I think that's a really important lesson that we should hopefully learn. Last thing from you, David, before we go.
Oh, that's a very broad question. Well, the one thing I would say is I would like to see how this plays out over the next week. I don't think this is done. I think there may be more to come. It depends on, is that in the form of more by-elections, or is it in some other form? I mean, I think we forget, John, there's also the potential that, at some point maybe Ben Wallace could go as well. So that may not be linked to this, but it could be a further by-election and problems for Rishi Sunak. But I plotting doesn't end here, shall we say. There's always things going on in the background, and Boris may go away, as we talked about, but he won't go quietly. And it's what he does before he goes.
And on any further by-elections or resignations, also have taken to it, it's also a big consequence for the MPs personally. Not only are they missing out on a year's pay, now people like Nadine Dorries has obviously got her role with GB News and whatever else, but for an MP to resign means even if they think they're going to lose their seat, so if you're an MP that stands again and loses, you get a year's salary as a payoff when you lose a seat. So that's a huge financial reason why some MPs, even though you think, oh, well, you're going to get a pounding anyway, they stay on and
these three haven't gone but without being sure they've got plenty of cash coming in. I'll wait to see the announcement for the Selby former MP about what he's doing next. They will not be short of a few, Bob.
One, I think, had the Selby MP, he might have been deselected. This is why
he had. They'd already selected a new candidate, but
I thought he must have said he was standing down, but he was deselected.
Yeah. Well, no, it was a weird one because he said he wasn't intending to stand at the next general election, and then they selected another candidate. But I don't know if he definitively said I won't be standing. It was sort of a suggestion. He'd said in it was either an interview or something he'd put out where he said basically there is other outside interests that he has that he would like to pursue again, which is probably monetary related.
Yeah, absolutely right.
I don't think he's talking about walking his dog.
We shouldn't end this broadcast without congratulating Mr. Mackenzie on becoming so English that he actually wears a cricket T-shirt. I mean, unless there's some underneath it. But how's that? Isn't that marvellous? Yeah, what a boy.
World Series.
I'll get you talking proper, lads. You know what I mean? In a few years. And then you'll be one of us,
Well, I have been roped into playing cricket on a Friday night now, which I didn't really foresee for myself. My mother and father there, that was very posh. My mum and dad. My mum and dad's house.
Mates from Peter, I think.
My mum and dad's house actually overlooks one of the premier cricket grounds in Scotland, which I do have to say is probably much smaller than my local cricket ground here. But that's,
No, awesome. Well, thanks very much, guys, for coming on. We will have more podcasts coming up. Once we have candidates confirmed, we will try and get interviews with them. And, we're now fully into the by-election season. Like I say, Lib Dems are already out there. Go check out, if you're on Facebook, I do know there are some virtual HQs that have been set up already where you can find out where you can go, what delivery and leafleting and canvassing plans they've already got in place. But keep your eyes peeled, because there'll be loads of ways of helping out. I mean, you're going to get party donation emails fairly regularly, but there's no way of getting around it. Money does matter when it comes to by-elections, and if you can't help, but you can throw some money. I mean, I had one guy who actually gave me money to go down and help in Tiverton and Honiton, and he paid for my hotel so then I could go and campaign. So there's lots of ways you can kind of help, or get your local party to help if you're wanting to get involved in this by-elections. But thank you, Richard. Thank you, David. Thank you to everyone watching and listening, and especially those who do throw us a little bit of money every month to our Patreon account. We really appreciate it, and we'll be back with loads more episodes coming up, and to our final sign-up.
Next Sunday, John, in light of what David said.
Absolutely, yeah, that's right. And
John, just to check for our listeners, did we stay away from the stuff that ALDC are now telling us we can't talk about? Is that...
No, there's no stuff. They haven't told me anything. The only thing they've said is just remember you're an employee of the ALDC is the only thing they've
got
said.
The plug in there.
Yeah,
I've been a member of it since it was ALC, so I think it's worth every penny, and everyone who's listening to this should be a member of it.
There we go. That's perfect. Right, I'll send you the cupcakes in the post. Yeah, thank you very much. All right, guys. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. We'll be back very soon. Bye now.